All right, good evening. My name is Bob Goldberg. I'm Executive Director of the Phil and Penny Knight Campus for Accelerating Scientific Impact. Thank you for attending the 8th Annual Science Night Out. This community lecture really speaks to our mission of science advancing society and really is one of the top highlights of the year for us. Now, primary reason we look forward to this so much is this community really turns out for science. It's amazing. So thank you all for being here tonight. In past years, we have had topics ranging from healthy aging, mindfulness, prevention strategies for children's health, to vision science and regenerative medicine. Now, since I stood on the stage last year, a good many things have happened in the Knight campus. One of them is that our Knight campus community, as you can see here, of students, faculty, and staff, has continued to grow to the point that we're bursting at the seams. It honestly kind of blows my mind that 3.5 years ago is when we opened this building, right in the middle of a pandemic, and now we're 90% full. Now, fortunately, you may have noticed that there's a second building being constructed behind the first on the other side of the mill race. Our second major science building has risen 4 stories from a construction pit and is scheduled to be completed in 2025. Now, you can get a sense for the vision of the second building and its connectivity to the first building in this artistic rendering. The sleek exterior was actually inspired by some of the biomaterial scaffolds that are being produced in the Knight campus. Now, what you're seeing here is a view from the 3rd floor of our current building, looking north across the mill race and towards the Willamette River. Building 2 is going to double our research and innovation capacity and added much-needed engineering makerspaces and teaching labs. It's also going to have a bistro on the corner that you can see just on the other side of the bridge. So if you get hungry on the way to Autzen Stadium, you'll be able to get a snack. Another super exciting development over this last year was an amazing gift from the Pape family to support students and faculty pushing to translate their research innovations into new startup ventures. The Pape Family Innovation Center began leasing space just in November of 2023 and is already occupied by 4 U of O startup companies. This innovation center is providing unique access to wet lab space and advanced core facilities that are critical for these startup companies to be successful. In addition to translating new medical innovations, these startups are also providing job opportunities for graduate students, a few of you are in the audience, and spurring the local economy. Now, just to highlight one of the companies that are housed in the Innovation Center and one that is relevant to tonight's lecture topic, Pandaria Technologies is commercializing medical devices instrumented with sensors, and this is the innovation work of Professor Guy Ong and his research team. Now, unlike the wearables that we all have on, this company is commercializing implantables that will enable surgeons to optimize the tension of ACL grafts for ACL reconstruction and to monitor healing and functional recovery during rehabilitation. These implantable sensors, which are becoming smaller, smarter, and more versatile, have the potential to help athletes like U of O's own Sabrina Ionescu, but also anyone who injures their bones, joints, or soft tissues. Now, one of the ways the Knight campus is striving to be different is in how we train our students and prepare them for successful careers. In addition to taking classes in cutting-edge technologies such as regenerative medicine, immunoengineering, synthetic biology, and biomedical data science, we have built in focused training in science communications, bioethics, and entrepreneurship. This is a very different approach that we think will distinguish our graduates to be well-rounded citizen scientists poised to be the leaders of tomorrow. And we're beginning to see the impact of our innovative training approach. For example, the Chief Research Officer and the Chief Scientific Officer of Pandaria Technologies, the company I just showed you, are 2 trainees who have worked with Professor Ong and Professor Mike Hahn, our speaker tonight, for many years. Now, you don't just have to take my word for the success of our students. The National Science Foundation over the last 4 years has awarded our bioengineering students with 8 highly prestigious NSF graduate research training fellowships and 2 honorary mentions. To put that in context, we've had more awarded fellowships this past year than a little school south of here that you may have heard of called Stanford. For a program that got its start in 2020, that's pretty amazing. So we're very proud of our students. In addition to our work with our bioengineering PhD students, we run a highly successful applied master's program that we call the Knight Campus Graduate Internship Program. They have 150 graduates per year. This program has tracks that are in competitive technical markets such as semiconductors, optics, and bioinformatics. And we developed this curriculum, and this is really the secret sauce of this program, by talking to industry partners and learning what they need their graduates to know. So our students are trained to be R&D ready when they hit the industry labs and the manufacturing sites. These students are so well prepared that companies are competing for them, and we are working to expand this program to keep up with demand. Now, the success of our students is credit to the students and their mentors, but I also want to give credit to our impact team. The impact team I consider to be the X factor in our unique training approach. This team is an interdisciplinary set of professionals from the Knight campus, the Knight Library, the Lundquist College of Business, and the School of Journalism and Communications, who provide professional coaching, science communication workshopping, resume and interview consulting, entrepreneurship training, and more. We're incredibly grateful for their hard work and their intentional focus on our students' success. All right, now before I introduce tonight's speaker, Professor Mike Hahn, I want to give a little bit of a background on an amazing collaborative effort that he is helping to lead. In early 2020, we were part of a small group of institutions who put together an audacious proposal to the Joe and Clara Tsai Foundation to create a global effort focused on transforming human health through discovering and translating the fundamental scientific principles of peak performance. We were thrilled that that vision that we proposed was embraced by Clara Wu, and the Wu-Tsai Human Performance Alliance was launched in 2021. With an astounding pledge of $220 million over 10 years to the 6 founding institutions that you see here, Alliance researchers have developed synergistic scientific programs to accelerate high-impact advances in human performance. At the University of Oregon, our effort includes a scientific moonshot focused on regenerative rehabilitation that's based in the Knight campus and an innovation hub housed in the Bowerman Sports Science Center. The Human Performance Alliance initiative is a great example of what can be achieved when thinking big and being willing to work outside the typical silos of a single research area, department, or institution. And in fact, as our speaker tonight will describe, this alliance has not only catalyzed new collaborations between research labs, but has also introduced a new era of partnership between UO researchers and athletics. All right, on to our main event tonight. Our speaker tonight is Professor Mike Hahn. He is director of the Bowerman Sports Science Center and associate director of the Human Performance Alliance at Oregon. Dr. Hahn is also a professor of human physiology in UO's College of Arts and Sciences and an associate faculty member of the Knight campus. He has been a leading expert in sports science and biomechanics for more than 2 decades, with a research focus on wearable sensors, lower limb musculoskeletal biomechanics, injury prevention, and human performance. Now, the amazing work that Mike and his team are doing are helping elite athletes perform at their best and avoid injuries, but is also relevant to individuals recovering from injuries in VA hospitals, or really any of us who want to perform at our peak, no matter our athletic ability or stage of life. His research has been funded by the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Veterans Affairs, and multiple industry partners. Now, in addition to lending tremendous expertise, I'm particularly grateful for Mike's great humor, his dedication to students, and his authentic partnership. So please join me in welcoming to the stage our 2024 Science Night Out lecturer, Professor Mike Hahn.
Thanks very much, Bob. Hello. It's a great pleasure for me to be with you tonight, and frankly, it's an honor to represent the University of Oregon and share some science with you. It's also great to get out of the lab occasionally and see real humans. So thank you for coming tonight. Really appreciate your time and your energy and your commitment to the University of Oregon. So every day I get to go to this place to go to work. I'm a very fortunate human. It's one of the best places I can imagine working, and I'll try to convince you of that tonight. I don't think it'll take too much convincing, honestly, since you're in Eugene, you know what it's like here, you know track town, you know runners are everywhere. Well, I get to go to work just underneath the stands over here, about 20 meters from the 100-meter start line. And our lab is underneath the stands. We can't see the track every day, but we can walk onto it, and we can take our athletes out and test them on the track and in the lab. So I think you'll agree already, it's the best place for a guy like me to work, and I'm very fortunate, so my talk is done. I've done my job. So it's not every day that we get to see world records broken and set, but we often get to be close to these individuals and buy tickets to get in the stands to see them in person. But in the lab, we also get to have the Olympians come in and run on our treadmill for us and let us take their blood, let us measure their oxygen exchange ratios, and give them feedback about how their training can be improved, even though they're already at near the ceiling of human performance. Of course, their coach always thinks they can get just a little closer to the ceiling, maybe push past it, and we provide the data to allow them to push those limits. Within the lab, we also have opportunity to measure forces and motion of the human participants as they come through. And so you can see in this space a number of things. It may look a little cluttered, but for a biomechanics lab, this is actually pretty good. So there's a runway here that leads out through this garage door into the indoor warm-up facility, which is, this leads to lane 2 of 6 for the indoor space underneath the stands. So when we run studies, we can have that garage door up, have people sprint out of it from the starting blocks, have them come in at pace, and then crash against a pad against the wall behind this picture. We can also control the speed of this treadmill and the grade of this treadmill to simulate where people run in the real world. And so it's a fantastic lab. We can measure just about anything we would like. There's a whole another set of toys down the hall that I'm not showing you, that if you want to come see the lab in person, we can show you. But needless to say, we're well stocked. We have all the toys any scientist could want to study human athletes. So here's a couple examples of up close and personal. One of our undergrad students from last year, who's a sprinter, played on the football team, and demoed our new instrumented starting blocks for us. So you can see these look like regular starting blocks, but inside is a force platform that measures all the forces they produce in reaction to the starting gun. And we can get reaction time, we can get how much propulsive impulse they produce to go jetting out into the lab. And then we can also measure uphill running and endurance running economy through the exchanges of gases through this computer here. And our staff and students get a lot of experience to work with locals, in this case, local physician, and also some of our elite athletes who come in. So have I always worked in such a great place? No, but I have worked in some great places. Do any of you recognize this state? It's right there, Colorado. Have you been to Colorado? Some of you? Oh, a lot. Okay, good. You went there for skiing, Denver Broncos perhaps, things like this. Well, so you're familiar with this place here, probably. So not quite the center of the state, but just on the edge where the mountains meet the plains and where the big city is, right? That's not where I'm from. I grew up in this place, Palisade. Has anyone been to Palisade? Really? That's good. Okay. 6 of you as far as I can see from the lights. So that's good. So what is it known for? Peaches. Good. This is a good quiz. Thank you very much. You're doing great. So Palisade is a town of about 8,000 people when I was growing up there. Nice little community for a kid to get into mischief, get rescued from the mischief by the local authorities who knew my parents and would deliver me home with no other repercussions. So kind of the idyllic place to grow up, really. This is what it looks like now. This is the Colorado River that comes down from the larger mountains up to the northeast and then comes through this valley, eventually, as you know, winds up down in the Gulf of California. But here, it's irrigated out to grow lots of those peaches and also lots of vineyards now. And where I grew up was probably, I'd say, 1 mile west of this picture. So you're on the edge of the desert. You're in this very lovely green space in the desert. And it was, again, a great place to grow up. Where the elementary school was compared to where my father's veterinary clinic was about 6 blocks. So the elementary school would let out 2:30. I would walk to the clinic, get bored, start asking my dad what I could do to help. Next thing I know, I'm in surgery and helping hold things, getting bloody, probably no appropriate training. But I learned a lot about anatomy at a very young age in that situation. The other side of my parental team, my mother, who's here with us tonight. Yeah. She was also instrumental in an early infusion of science for me. So I learned anatomy from my father, I learned biology from my mother. So she taught high school biology and then worked for Fish and Wildlife, out tromping through the woods looking for rare species. And as a kid, I just assumed this is how every kid grew up, that you went to the mountains over the weekend, you got pond scum, you brought it home, you looked at it under the microscope, you got those little planaria that you can cut down the middle, and they have two heads, and then they grow two different worms. Like, these are the things we did as a kid growing up. Again, I thought it was normal. Then I went to high school, learned that it wasn't quite as normal at that point, and that there were other things you could do, including sports. So as a high school student, I was not very interested in academics because it was a little bit boring, because I'd already learned it all, apparently. But I was really excited about sports. And so I played soccer, I ran track, I played basketball until I stopped growing at the same height I am now, and switched to skiing instead for the winter sport. So again, lovely place to grow up, fantastic way to start life. So after that, how do you get to here? Well, you just drive to Oregon and start working, right? Easy. Eugene's very welcoming. No, actually, the way I got here was to start with a biology degree at a place called Colorado Mesa University. We called it MIT because it was Mesa in town. The local kids got a lot of scholarships there, and so it was an easy place to say yes to. The student-teacher ratio was about 30-1, and so we were researching inside the labs of our faculty members by sophomore year and getting very diverse experiences. So while I was tempted to go to Boulder, Fort Collins, big-name schools, I was very happy to have a full ride where I worked hand in hand with the local professors. And I think that set me off with my mentality today that I feel that value is critical. And even in a big school like U of O, we still try to create that kind of intimate setting. But you can't stay in Colorado forever, apparently. So I ventured off to Iowa State University, Ames. Great place to study because there's nothing to do there. Only go to the lab, only study, drink coffee, do it again the next day. So there I studied shoulder biomechanics, learned a lot about the glenohumeral joint. My colleagues in the audience, Andy Carduna and his students, they don't think I know about the shoulder, but I do. I just moved past it after I learned about it. So after a master's degree there, I had the opportunity to take what I think was probably the first dream job that I could have imagined, which was to go to Minnesota to the Mayo Clinic. If you want to study orthopedic biomechanics or anything about human body and medicine, what a place, right? It's the best place perhaps in the world to do this work. So I moved down the arm from the shoulder to study the elbow and the wrist for joint replacements. I was working with orthopedic surgeons from around the globe who taught me a lot about multicultural experiences, including food diversity, language diversity, how cheap it is to golf in Minnesota compared to Japan, these sort of things. It was very, very useful experience. I loved it there. It was great. Where else would I want to work? Well, I met a guy named Lishan Cho, who was my PhD advisor and also a good friend at that time. Our daughters are, I think, about 4 months apart from each other. And he said, I'm taking a job at the University of Oregon. You should be my first PhD student. And I said, I'm making a salary. I don't want to go back to school. I'm great. I love it here. And he talked to me for about another month. I talked to my wife, Janelle, who's still with me. And she said, yes, that sounds fine, I guess. Why not take a 75% pay cut and get a stipend and go be students again? Why not? So we moved ourselves and our 10-month-old daughter to Eugene, which we learned about puddles and we learned about no snow and things like this. Great place to study, a lot to do besides studying, so it was very distracting around here, but we focused and got through it. First job was at Montana State University as a faculty member. Another beautiful place to live, beautiful place to work, difficult place to do clinical level research, I found after 5 years. So when my friend from Seattle called and said the VA is hiring for a motion lab director, we would like you to come here and direct the new lab here. I said, what do you do there? And he says, prosthetic engineering. that sounds pretty good. Let's go there. So it sounds a little bit maybe all over the place, and I would agree it is. But this is part of why I'm explaining this to you, is that part of my career has been that I'm always interested in solving a new problem, always interested in figuring out what the situation is and trying to fix it, trying to solve it. And so engineering is a great discipline for that. I was a biologist, so I learned about systems in biology, but then I learned about engineering from my colleagues and my mentors. So going to the VA to work in prosthetic engineering actually was more natural than what you might have guessed. But Seattle, too big a place, too busy, can't ride your bike to work. So in 2012, when the University of Oregon opened a position for the Bowerman Sports Science Center directorship, I jumped at the chance to come back to Eugene to make sure my family was healthy, happy, and specifically my wife was happy. When we moved here, she said, we're never moving again, this is it. This is the career spot. And happily, I completely agree. So here we are, and the logo changed in the meantime, by the way. So back to the lab. So we can get all this great work done, we can study innumerable things. It's a fantastic place. But can we bring everyone from the community into the lab? Yeah, if we schedule carefully, but it might take too long, and maybe you don't like to run on a treadmill. So we start thinking about, can we go outside? Can we take our lab outside? It turns out most of that equipment doesn't like rain. It fails if it gets wet. And so Eugene, for 9 months of the year, or 10, is a dangerous place for our equipment, right? So we began thinking, what can we do actually to go outside and play where people actually are doing their sports? This accelerated when COVID forced us to figure out how to go outside to study things and not be close to people indoors. So we actually started solving that problem by using wearable technology. So how many of you in the audience have something on your wrist that measures your steps? Most everyone, probably. My mom, not yet. So most of us have these things. It records activity levels for us to some degree. It maybe tells you how many steps you took during the day, even though if you go to the marathon on Sunday, my student told me he got like 30,000 steps by clapping through the marathon. So perhaps not detecting what's actually happening. If you and your partner go for a walk together and you walk precisely 2 miles, one of you may have walked 2.1, the other may have walked 1.7. Wonder why? There's a little difference here, right? So it's on your wrist, it's not on your legs, it's not on your waist, it's detecting some motion. It's pretty good, it's amazing technology. But is it precise? Not so much. So when we compare that to the lab, we say that's rubbish, we can't use that data whatsoever, come back to the lab. But not everyone can come into the lab, as we talked about. So these devices also record tons and tons of data, and then it's proprietarily managed by those companies. So we started thinking, well, we can't hack those companies necessarily. It's perhaps unethical. There's a new president of the university who might not approve of this. The past one probably would have been fine, but. Sorry. Didn't intend that one, but sometimes it's just too easy, I guess. So anyway, so we said, okay, let's not use those proprietary devices. Let's use some other device. But we partnered with a company called Casio out of Japan, and they provided us the raw data coming from their sensors, so we were very happy to work with them. But then when we started looking at all this data, we said, this is too much data. What can we do with this to make any sense of it? So this is where machine learning came in to our equations, literally the equations. So machine learning, any of you familiar with machine learning? Couple? Are you more familiar with artificial intelligence, perhaps? Or at least the name of it? It's everywhere, right? It's coming for you. Well, so machine learning is a tool used for processing large, complex data sets, like a statistical package, really. It helps us to identify patterns, helps us to build models or structures of how the world works. It's basically mathematical modeling. And it also can help us classify, is it a tomato or an apple? What is it? Is it a cat, is it a dog? Is it a runner going uphill, downhill? It can help us classify these things. Also, to our main goal in this project, help predict near future events. So meaning what's happening in the next step, the next minute, not is it going to rain next week. So it's near future predictions. So artificial intelligence is possible because of machine learning. It's the tool that allows artificially intelligent systems to actually exist. So some of the ones you may be used to or have heard more about recently. Anyone play Go, the game? Only Victor? Yep. There's a deep learning approach, deep reinforcement learning, see, English is easy, that was used to train a system to beat humans at the game Go. It's called AlphaGo. There's neural networks that I'll be explaining a little bit later today. There's computer vision, so the autonomous vehicles. The idea is that they will be able to detect other vehicles, humans, stop signs, and make correct decisions based on that. And then natural language processing. You've heard of ChatGPT. Have you used it? It's not the best communicator. Could use some help, so humans still need to interact with it to improve its capacity. All of these are examples of machine learning approaches that enable artificial intelligence systems. So I was first exposed to some of these ideas when I was a student here at the University of Oregon. In 2001, I took a class from Professor Sean Lockery, who I still see in the local pubs writing articles. It's amazing. Although everyone else is loud, obnoxious, and he's very focused writing his articles. I don't know if he's here tonight, but I'm amazed at his focus. So I took a class 2001 from him where we learned how to code the depolarization wave of neurons. And he taught us how to do that by showing us how it works in nematodes, and then showing us how the math would work out if we just could figure out how to code it. And then we learned how to code it. And so we could simulate neural activity by writing math, which was an eye-opener for me as a biologist before. I also took a class 2002 from Art Farley, who ended up being on my dissertation committee. It was named Genetic Algorithms, which I thought, I don't know, sounds interesting. There's probably some problems in there. It's going to be fun to solve. In that class, we learned about how you can program individual agents to behave as if they're individual birds, fish, and how they can flock, how they can form schools. In this case, we didn't do anything as elegant as this, but you can simulate murmurations of starlings. So how many of you have been to Agate Hall in the spring? Yeah, you know what I'm talking about? This is beautiful, right? That's a small version of what often happens in the UK in the spring and in the fall, where these images come from. So these things I learned from these two guys were opportunities that were provided to me as a student at U of O. But if I hadn't leaned into it and said, I want to learn something new and crack open that part of my skull, I would never have taken these opportunities. So I just want to bring that out. That's something that repeats a lot in our work at the university, is you don't just do the same thing. You pursue the next opportunity. And sometimes you have to get pushed into it. So that's my job as a professor, is to kick/push my students into the next opportunity. Sometimes I'm not sure they like it. But. So if you were to look up on Google images of neural networks, you might see images like this, which are gorgeous, right? Very exciting. There's lots of bright, shiny things. Looks like glass structures you might be able to create in the glass-blowing studios in town. Looks amazing. I love it. But that's not what neurons actually look like. They actually look like this. So this is a photo credit to Adrienne Huxtable, who's in the audience somewhere back here, I think. When I asked her, what do neurons actually look like, she sent me this picture. And I said, what am I looking at? And so she explained to me, as a good professor would, that cell bodies are up in here, but not just the cell bodies. There's other things they won't tell you about. And then there's these blue projections that you see coming out are more like the axon and the dendrites that you might know about when it comes to neurons. And then there's these big monsters here that I thought, aha, those are the motor neurons when I first saw it, because they're bigger, they're flashier, they look pretty cool. No, those are microglia, so I don't know what those really do. So Adrienne explained to me they enhance the function of the neurons to make the communication work better, and it kept going. And finally I said, okay, microglia help, good, we'll move on. So this is the level of neurology that I'm comfortable with. Neurons, they connect, happy to move on. Once they get to the muscles, then I get excited. So with that, we simplify things a lot to say, well, that beautiful blue image you saw and all the microglia, it actually kind of looks like this instead. So this is one motor neuron as depicted by this artist. And then you might have two. So maybe the one is communicating by synapse connection and kind of chemical transfer of information to excite the other and pass the word along. Simplification. Sorry, Adrienne. We can simplify those further to say, right, I've got 3 channels coming into one cell. I can sum up those channel inputs and figure out what to do with that with some decoding, maybe a transfer function, and then put out some information to say, move the finger, drive the car, do whatever the thing is. And then if I put a bunch of them together, I can make a network of neurons that mathematically behave kind of like biological neurons. This is the foundation of where this artificial approach came to simulating neural activities. So we've used this. I actually, after taking those classes, started using this for my dissertation. In 2002 was the first time that I convinced my mechanical engineering professor to let me do this. So this was from my work, as it clearly shows everything I just talked about makes perfect sense, right? So turns out you can publish these things in Journal of Biomechanics, not in Register Guard, not in please come to my class to learn about biomechanics. They're kind of obscure ends of the world where these things get published. And a few hundred people read them, perhaps, maybe my mom. And people say, that was good work. Nice, you can get a job. So just to try to show you, you can do great work. It can be very complicated. You can simplify it as best as you can, but it's still not necessarily explainable, right? So I just want to give you that kind of peek behind the curtain. So we're in Eugene. I've been convincing you it's a great place to work, to live, to do research, and there's copious amounts of runners around here, right? So when you take people outside and have them run up hills, run through the trails, run the marathon that just happened this weekend, I can't necessarily put all these markers on them and have them run on my instrumented space. So what do? Well, in this case, we had a study that was funded by Casio as an industry partner that provided the sensors, as I mentioned before. And they also funded some of my great people. So you can see here at the top, Seth Donahue was a PhD student at the time. He's now a postdoc fellow at Northwestern, working in prosthetics and orthotics. And Ida Shebby is with us here tonight. She's a research engineer in our group. And then Rachel Robinson is a local PT in town who's also pursuing her PhD, also here tonight. And then Yuta Suzuki was a visiting scholar from Osaka who brought his family here for his sabbatical. And we used as much of their time as we could to eat as much Japanese food as we could. And he's really, really good at programming and solving neural network problems. So it was a great team to work on this project. What we did in this project was we recruited people from the community, not the elite athletes for the NCAA squad at U of O, not the Bowerman Track Club. We recruited all of you to be a part of this. There's very little rules about how fast you had to go or how long you had to run, just that you were a runner who wanted to be involved in a study. That's not quite true. We had to enroll you if you were going to run the half marathon or the marathon for the Eugene Marathon that year. That was our enrollment requirement. So not quite, I wouldn't run in it myself, so I couldn't be in my study. But these were people who aged from 18, this is not supposed to be question mark, it's supposed to be 59. So that was a placeholder. So from 18 to 59, you can see that it represents fairly good distribution of male and female athletes. And we had 52 people come from our community, like yourselves, who said, I'm running the marathon, I would like to be in this study. We studied them throughout the year with fixed pace runs on a track nearby the Bowerman facility, not in the Hayward Field facility, but nearby. We ran them up and around Hendricks Park for a 5-mile prescribed run, and then we had them run much of those same paces on our treadmill, and we collected way too much data. We put sensors on their feet and on their waistband to record where the sacrum at the base of their spine was and how it was moving. And then we also used these load soles, which is a normal force measuring device to see how much force you're putting into the shoe, and then equated all those things to, right, what can we do back in the lab to get the same answers, and can we make a model to actually predict what we could get back in the lab? And so I'm going to try to convince you that we did that. So as you run, not everyone runs with a heel strike pattern. Some people are midfoot or forefoot strikers, and we can debate for 3 days about what's the best way to do it. or 3 months, 3 years, whatever. But as you come through and you heel strike, there's an initial vertical load of reaction force. And if you hit with your heel, oftentimes there's this thing here called a transient impact peak. It's like the first insult to your body. Your calcaneus is basically hitting the concrete, despite how thick your shoe is. It's still hitting. And then there's a little bit of a recoil, and then the rest of this is body weight acceptance. So that sounds interesting, right? So as your mass is coming down and gravity is trying to drive you into the ground, and you're jumping, you tend to have a lot of acceleration headed down into the ground. Then your legs decelerate that. That's what this force is here, is the deceleration of the mass. And so we can measure how intense that run was, or how intense your landing is, based on how quickly this rises, whether there's a peak here, what the max value is here, and what the area under this curve is, to understand all the energetics about how you're running. So we can measure all this in the lab, and we can sort of measure it out in the field, but it's better if we can model it and use minimal sensors out in the field. So what we ended up doing is collecting all of this data. So you see the patterns, right? Tell me what you observe. Okay, so there's some things here. There's a lot of things here. There's a gap, okay, and there's a lot more things. Okay, so this is 3.6 hours of running. So we put sensors on one of the volunteers for the study and said, for your long run this weekend, could you just wear these sensors, please? And they gave us 3.6 hours of data. I think that was the longest session that we actually were successful in recording. I'm guessing this was a bathroom stop. There might have been some traffic that needed to be waited for, but pretty consistent showing of running. So what this is actually vertical accelerations on the body over time. So again, 3.6 hours. I had to recalculate it 5 times before I trusted it. So all of that wall of data, we can zoom in and get individual foot strikes or weight acceptance patterns from the acceleration of this thing that's clipped to your waistband. So we can get that close to what your center of mass acceleration pattern would look like. So if we zoom in on that a little bit further, you can see the values here in meters per second squared, going up to 40 roughly in this case. That's about 4 Gs, right? So that's a pretty large acceleration that you're peaking at with just a casual 3.6 hour run. And you see a lot of variation, but you do see some patterns that are repeatable, right? Are they similar to that force pattern that we saw? Close, but not identical at all. So we use then machine learning to take this noisy data and learn the patterns, and then try to rewrite that force curve to simulate what it must have been like. So with that, we were able to successfully simulate or model the data. So the black is the recorded force data in the foot, or in between the foot and the shoe, and this hash green line is the simulated or the modeled data. And you can see it's quite close. Hopefully you can see it. It's a little bad on the color there. But occasionally it overestimates, sometimes it's delayed, sometimes it underestimates. But as a mathematical model, we were extremely pleased with this. So overall, the waveform is well matched. But if you look at the discrete peaks, I could be inaccurate, the slope could be off a little bit. So we began looking at what are the matches across these different speeds. So this is the speed or running velocity on the x-axis. From 2 meters per second up to about 5.5 meters per second. And then here we're looking at peak force, so the absolute peak value here. And on this graph, we're looking at loading rate, so the slope of that curve. And so from this, you can see that the peak force is pretty well matched with measured in black and the estimated in red. That's from our model, from the neural networks that we were using. So that looks pretty good. But then the loading rate starts to peel off and look not quite so similar at about 3 to 3.5 meters per second. So it's quite good at the slow speeds, not so good for the majority of these speeds. And then the impulse, which is the area under this curve, another good set of matching outputs. So we're mixed. We did well, but not so well. We could always do better. And so as soon as we publish these things, the reviewers say, you know, if you tried this technique, you probably could get just a little better accuracy. It doesn't sound like that, but I feel better reading their reviews that way because I feel like it matches the personalities that they must have. So we are improving this. We are publishing. We are still improving the models. Occasionally, we patent things about this because the companies that make these sensors are keen to deliver product to the things that are on your wrists. And we're thinking, yeah, you could do that. But you could also put this thing in your waistband and then maybe get it licensed to a company that wants to link it to your phone as a feedback technique. So this is things we're in progress on right now. So this is the 5-mile prescribed run that I mentioned. So University of Oregon, Hayward Field here. Do you know what is up here? Hendricks Park, right? There's a little bit of a hill. So that's when it gets blue or dark blue, the slower you're going. Go across the ridge, do a little loop apparently, and then back down the other side of the hill where you're going very fast. So that's why it's red. And then go through this nice little village here, end up over on Prees Trail, and then wind your way back to campus. 5-mile loop. Have any of you run that loop? Couple? Okay, good. Then you know of which I speak, right? The hills are enjoyable. So what I'm showing you here on the right is the map of the estimated loading rate versus the measured loading rate. And what I would like you to look at is the level ground. If it matches exactly on this line, then it's perfection, which is usually skeptical for me. You don't usually get 100% accuracy, but it's a pretty good fit. These dashed lines are how much variation is a good fit for the model, and most of them are within there. The coloration from dark blue to dark red, slow velocity, fast velocity. Decline, we have a little bit more spread, a little bit of variation. Incline, probably the best fit that we have. So if any of you have run on this trail or run up and down hills, as you run downhill, it's a little sketchy, right? You're avoiding rocks, roots, cats, whatever, and you're coming down trying not to fall. As you run level ground, maybe some of us don't really care how we run, so we just run all lopsided, and that gets recorded in the variation that we see here. Running uphill, there's only a couple ways to really do it, and you kind of just have to put the foot slightly uphill and move onto it, right? So that becomes very repeatable, very easy to replicate in our model as well. But we would like the eventual all foot contacts to end up looking as good as this. So we have some improvements to make. So why do all this work? Well, it's fun, first of all. The runners are cool to work with. It's nice to have runners in town that we can chat with. Many of us are runners in the lab. But for clinical relevance, you can use these models to build individualized load monitoring kind of paradigms or protocols. So if you say, I want to run the marathon, I can say, great, have you done it before? No? Okay. Have you run a 5K? Okay, you have. Okay, so let's build not just your training program as a coach, but let's build it as a biomechanical advisor as well, to say the way you run, you should not exceed these speeds, or you should not exceed this training at those speeds, because the force data indicates you're going to be injured if you do it that way. Or you can maximize your running style to make it more efficient, so that on the downhill runs, you're not so variable, or on the uphill runs, you can get more power production based on the current research that's happening in our lab we could talk about later. So individualized patterns are useful for that. Also, if we get those individual patterns, we can identify the risk and more specifically monitor how people are recovering post-injury. Okay, so I've told you how we can measure or model certain forces, but there's other things we can measure. So other forces in the foot, we can measure shear forces. As you hit the ground with your heel or other structures, you have this force going down, the reaction force is back up, but then you also could slip along the ground. So a shear force is when the two planes are moving past each other or trying to. They have a tendency to do that. So you've probably experienced that if you were walking or running on a slippery surface, you experience that slip. It's the shear force that's driving you into that direction. Difficult thing to measure. In fact, near impossible. But in our lab, we can measure those things. In the wild, not so much. So what we end up seeing from these data, this is lab-based data. If you're walking, vertical reaction force looks like this, and then the braking force when you're trying to slow down. As you come in, you're going from accelerating to the ground, slowing down, and then propelling away again. So these shear forces we can measure in the lab. But again, difficult to measure outside. So then comes our partnership with the Knight campus. So you heard about Dr. Ong earlier from Bob's introduction. He and Mike Hahn, who was a PhD student in my lab before moving over to Guy's lab for his postdoc, we co-developed this crazy little sensor, which you're going to see in practice in just a bit, that has an optical source, a light source, that bounces off of this grid and then reflects back to a sensor that picks up what type of light was that. Is it green? Is it blue? Is it red? This is the size of the sensor. It's quite small, and what we can do with it then is embed it in other things. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. But I want to highlight this beautiful interaction. So with the Tsai Human Performance Alliance, this has allowed these collaborations that were about to happen, probably should be happening, just can't find the time. And now when Clara Wu and Joe Tsai come and say, please do all the things you've been wanting to do, and here's some money to help. It's easy to say yes. So our friends call and we say, yes, we would love to work on that project with you, now that we have resources to actually pay the people to do it, the students, the trainees, and build the equipment. So this was a collaboration between my group, the Knight campus, and then Sport Product Design up in Portland, that we began this iteration of design and testing. So with this, in my group, we would test the new design, it would get redesigned, we would integrate it into some other product, test that product, redesign, and keep looping until we get to a satisfied place. Of course, you're never satisfied with this. You can always improve it. But this design cycle is something that we really want to emphasize is a great opportunity for our collaborations. So the way this sensor works is that you have a light source and just a traditional LED bouncing off this pattern, and then you've got a photodiode that picks up the color pattern. And then if you take that initial grid and you slide it in any direction, you can get indications of how much shear, how much motion is occurring. So you can move it into the red, you can move it into the blue, you can move it diagonally into both of those, and then we can calibrate all that to figure out, wait, how much force was required to get to this place? And so what we end up doing is showing through the circuitry that's designed that you can show changes in the coloration that's reflected back, and then we can deduce what's going on with, is that vertical shear, horizontal shear, or a combination of the two. So what do you use these things for? Well, we're in Eugene, so we're thinking shoes, right? So you can put them in shoes. In fact, we'll show you that in just a bit, that we have done. And then you could also, one of our initial ideas was to put it into the prosthetic socket liners. So many prosthesis users suffer from ulceration on the skin surface of the residual limb. And due to kind of the fact that you can never get a perfect fit with that prosthetic socket. And so what if you could detect how much shear is actually being produced in that spot or in a region of spots and use that as a way to improve the design of these systems? So this is a place we're planning to go into. So when we work with the Sport Product Design Group, this involved Professor Sokolowski, who had about 20 years of experience at Nike before she came back to U of O. And she recruits bright young stars to join their sport product design program, and they have to do master's projects, right? So we said, why don't you take this sensor we've made and build us a shoe that we can put it into so we can measure shear forces like we can in the laboratory. So when you work with sport product design students, you get fantastic images like this. And so I'm queuing up my students that are going to start coming up for some demos. But all of this gets you excited. Here's the sensor right here, squashed in the middle of that build. And so you need to test the thing to see if you're getting the data you expect. So we have material testing apparatus in the Knight campus to do this. And then with these intelligent people, we said, this one's pretty smart. This one's pretty smart for sure. We need a third, perhaps smarter student. So he's not on stage yet, so I can embarrass him a little bit. We recruited Austin Moeller to the group, who was a general science major, was computer science, decided to focus on the science rather than the computers. And we said, Austin, we're getting decent calibrations with this sensor, but we could improve this. How about you help us design a neural network to do this? He said, of course, yes, and came up with this structure that's a bit more complex than the one I came up with my PhD in 2002. And he actually has this work in review now with an engineering journal called Sensors Letters. And so as an undergraduate who's now going on to graduate school at Colorado State University for his master's, he's already going to be published probably by the time he gets there. So why do I emphasize these things? Well, you got to brag on your people, right? Plus, I want to emphasize again, this is what our model is. Like, you find the students who are eager, you give them opportunities, you energize them, you push them a little bit, and then great things happen, like they get published, they go to grad school, and I mean, it's really why we're here. So I really want to emphasize that again and again, because the opportunity of Mike working with Guy was because Guy and I had started talking about we should swap trainees someday. So here's Mike, here's the opportunity, easy, it works. We recruit the next one up, easy, it keeps working. University of Oregon is fantastic for this, so it makes our jobs much, much easier. Austin, how's it going back there? What do you think? It's not working? Okay. Okay, it's connecting. This is good. It's going to be great. It works. There we go. Perfect. I'll let you fiddle with this a little bit. Okay, so I told them I would embarrass them a little bit. I'll try not to go too much. So Jenna Kachtorian is a human physiology student, senior this year. She's hoping to go to med school after perhaps a gap year. The reason I know Jenna, 2 reasons. She works in Marianne Hiderachi's lab in Knight campus as a research student and as a human physiology student, so we're always proud of that. But also, she's associated with this guy, I believe romantically. And yeah, there we go. And so when he said, Mike asked me to do this demo, what size foot do you have? And she said size 8. We said, perfect. Can you help us with this? Because this is the shoe. Do you mind just pulling the this is the shoe that was designed by Gabby Lorenzo as part of the sport product design group. And it looks like a shoe, right? It's nice. But inside of it is that sensor, as was built in the stack. And you can see this teeny little pigtail here. It goes to a battery that we've tied into the laces at the moment. That wouldn't be acceptable product, right? So we're going to continue to reiterate on that. But Jenna is going to demo for us. What you see up here on the screen is the live signal coming through. This is the vertical load, the compression that she's putting onto the sensor. And then these are the relative changes of where she's at in this space. So yeah, if you can just walk around a little bit. Well done. Human physiology students are good walkers, yes. Do you want to do any other, like try to push into, I don't know if you can see differences or not. Also, we'll improve this for later demos. But the fact it's working is fantastic, right? So, all right, thanks so much, Jenna. Thanks, Austin. Well done. Also, as you can see, we have gregarious students who are willing to get pestered for such things. So we're excited for this. I think it has a lot of potential. And as I mentioned, we're also looking to put it into prosthetic devices. There's even been talk about putting it into handlebars for cyclists, shoulder pads, see how things are slipping past each other. Lots of applications. Anything that you can imagine shear forces going through. Okay, so we talked about 2 different types of forces, right? Well, there's other things we're interested in. Not just running, we're interested in other sports as well. And how many of you know or have heard of or know someone who has torn their ACL? Yes, okay, everyone, yeah, it's ACL. Well, where is this thing? This anterior cruciate ligament. Here's a sketch of a knee from a book chapter that I and a colleague up in Seattle contributed to. Hopefully the physicians in the room will critique the accuracy of the anatomy for later. Do you know that in female athletes, they are 2 to 3 times greater risk of tearing their ACL than male athletes in just soccer alone? Also, do you know that in the collegiate ranks, female athletes or female soccer is the highest rate of ACL injuries across all the collegiate sports? These things then are debilitating in the short term, meaning they require 6 months of rehab with brilliant surgical techniques to get back to high-level play. But then they often lead to early onset knee osteoarthritis. In the soccer athletes that we've tested and that we know about in the professional ranks, many times they've ruptured the same repaired ACL again. Even some of our grad students can attest to this. So Alex Morgan, luckily, I think, has only ruptured once when she was 17 years old and still went on to have the illustrious career she has. So it's not a career ender, but it is a career affector and potentially lifelong injury cause for osteoarthritis. So many factors lead to this, for sure. There's maybe a dozen at least. But most of the time it hasn't been focused on how the foot is in interaction with the ground. But that's one of the main things about soccer that you're familiar with, is that there's cleats, right? These are examples of very specialized cleats made for different surfaces, different levels of play. Like the Premier League might use these wicked-looking metal spikes that cause severe injuries if they interact with human flesh. But they have a lot of traction into that space. None of these cleats are designed for women. They're all designed for the male foot, for the male weight and speed and style of play. So why is that exactly? 50% of the population not being represented, seems a little wrong. ACL risk 3 times higher in soccer athletes. We took a look in our group and said, there's a problem here. Maybe we should try to solve this. And so that's what we've been going towards. So I'm going to show you real quick a few videos. This is not a female athlete. This is Hide, who is one of our male students in the lab, but is a Sheldon High School soccer athlete. So he is now a PhD student with us, demonstrating in the Marietta Sport Performance Center, where we collect this in-lab data. But we don't want to stay in the lab, so we send him over to the Mashofsky Center, which is the indoor practice facility for the U of O Ducks, and we have him do various cutting maneuvers here. This is a long, exhausting protocol. This is why he's not going fast. That takes about 30 minutes to fatigue the athlete to the point where their knee mechanics start to go a little wobbly. Here's a quick view of slowed down what it looks like. And then here's some pressure data that we can get that is demoed quickly for you here. Let you bring it up. So as the person is going along, they actually do the cutting maneuver right in here. It's a very small, subtle difference in this trace, but if you look carefully up here, you can see some small differences that come where they're loading onto their forefoot. Right about there. So it's a little bit of stutter step, full plant on the other, and then stutter step again. So this is to show you what the signal looks like as we're collecting it and when the cutting maneuver occurs. So at this point, new demo. Thank you for coming up so promptly. I can see Bob is watching the time for us. We have Emily Karolidis, who is a PhD student in the group and is the lead on this project. Let's see if we can switch over. Oh, okay. And so she is the one who convinced me not to do running biomechanics work, that we need to do soccer cleat work. So very passionate about this space, and is from a sport product design background. And so the footwear companies already have their radars out, and they're saying, when is she done? Because we want her to come and lead our programs as well. I don't know if she quite believes me on that, but I know at least 3 companies that are interested. And then over here we have Alex Denton, who is modeling the sensors for us tonight. They're inside of her shoes, and then they come up to this collection pack that's kind of looked like a little cummerbund that she's wearing. This is what we use for the data collections. It's not ideal because you don't want to wear this during sporting activities, but it is nicer than being in the lab to get real-world data. Okay, so they're going to do a bit of a calibration here. Well, I need to introduce Alex, too. So she's a postdoc scholar in our group. She actually was an undergrad student in our lab, and one of those students I was telling you about, that you give them opportunities, they take advantage of it, and then amplify that. She took advantage of that to have some good research experiences and then go to University of Michigan for her PhD before we recruited her back to be a postdoc scholar in our group. So she came back with 5 years of more skills than we could have taught her here. All right, so Alex, it's working, yeah? So please walk or jog across the stage so you can see real time what these sensors are showing in various forms. You can see the rainbows here, of course, but then we can see the time series plots as well. Okay, this time as you run across, try to make a cut to the right, not to the left. Yeah. Okay. Did you see it? It's a little hard. You saw her do it. The data is often hard to see in the raw that shows where exactly the change is. So we use then our approaches to break down that data into where the exact trace of the pressure is and where the forces were loaded up, and then what shoes she's wearing to say, at the fatigue state, is this shielding the bad knee mechanics that's likely to lead to injury, or is it improving it so that she doesn't have to worry about that risk, or is it putting her at greater risk? So this is where we're headed with this project. So, okay, thank you. Great. Bob, for the record, that's 2 for 2. So I was a little nervous, but we did. Okay, so what have we been talking about? So we've been talking about sensors. I mentioned early on about these pressure sensors. Pressure sensors, as well as these IMUs, these inertial measurement units, and how we could use those to simulate or estimate the ground reaction forces out in the wild while people are running. This is product that already exists. You can buy it if you have desire for that, and you want to maybe work on some coding, you can. Not the most usable sensors for the layperson, but you can use them for sure. They're already available. These are in design still. We have shown proof of concept, shown that they can work. We need to iterate more. I think Guy's in the audience. He probably has 500 ideas of how we can improve this. So this is coming. It's not quite ready yet. These, the pressure sensors, are also market ready, but what to do with them in the application for footwear and soccer, this is where we're headed next. So I just want to recap the 3 things we've been talking about today. As I wrap up, I just want to acknowledge all of the trainees that have been involved in these 3 studies and the colleagues as well. There's about twice as many of these individuals I could list who are contributors to the rest of the research going on in our lab, but I want to highlight just these 3 studies for tonight. And you already saw 4 of them up here tonight as well. So the meandering path has brought me to here. Very happy to be here. I think if I had taken the channel that went straight to the ocean, I would have been out in the ocean somewhere. But instead, I got to enjoy the path and enjoy the journey to get to here. So thank you very much for your attention and your time. Appreciate it so much.
Two for two. That was awesome, Mike. So, biology from mom, anatomy from dad. Where'd the comedic talent come from?
Have you heard of Young Life? It was Young Life, actually.
All right, so we have some time for Q&A, and Mike and I are nearly blind up here. So what we'll do is there's the text up there. If you have a question, you can text it, and it will eventually make it to me, and I will pass on as many questions as I can to Mike. I'm going to start with one of my own that you didn't talk about tonight too much, but I'm really impressed with. And really, the Bowerman Sports Science Center, from the beginning, had a community engagement mission to it, and I know it's really important to you. Could you talk a little bit about what you're doing in that area and why it is so important?
Sure. Yeah, we are a community-facing group within the university, and it's part of our mission. It's part of what drives us. We don't want to just publish papers and graduate PhD students, even though that's what the university pays us to do. We feel very strongly that the university is a member of the community, and that our lab is, as working with athletes, probably easiest to integrate with community. And so part of that, we integrate with kids sports, with local researchers like at Slocum and local PT clinics as well. And we bring people in from the outside who want to know what is their VO2 max, what is their lactate threshold, can I keep running after this injury? And so we do fee-for-service work for that to break even on our costs, but we also then go out to the community and help with pop-up camps with kids sports to staff those to get the word of sports science out into the world. So it's very important to us.
All right, we're starting to get some questions coming in.
Good.
So someone wants to know who makes those insoles?
Which ones? The first ones? Yes, okay, both of them. So they're both made by the same company, which is in Germany. So it's a company called Novell. So the load soles, the first ones, measure the normal force, and the pressure sensors are also made by that same company.
All right, and the next question is, what advice do you have to recreational runners to try to avoid injuries?
Don't run. So this is the running joke in our lab, is that to avoid running-related injuries, don't run. But it turns out then you bring other problems, like maybe heart disease and obesity, things like this. So all joking aside, building up to running is very important. A lot of people think, yesterday felt good, I'll do it again, or maybe I'll go further, a little faster. Your body is always recovering from those sessions just as much as if you went to the gym and did a bunch of bench press and squats today. You're probably going to be a little sore tomorrow. You shouldn't do it again immediately. So as you ease into running, take your time, take breaks, take rest days. Even if you're a lifelong runner, take breaks, take rest days. I think that's what we see is often the cause of some of these injuries is its overuse. So your soft tissue tends to not remodel in a strengthening way. It can remodel in a degenerative way. So if you continue to load the same system again and again, it can lead to these injuries. The other thing is strength training. Get into the gym. Don't just run. Lift weights to get core strengthening, as well as just non-running muscle strengthening as well. And the last thing is move sideways. So if you run, you tend to just run forward, right? The joke is we turn at the curve and then run straight, and then turn at the next curve, run straight, because that's the track. But if you play soccer, you play basketball, you do anything that involves lateral motions, you tend to have less injuries as a runner.
That's why we need the shear sensors.
And more friends, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, these questions are rolling in, so you're going to have to answer shorter
Okay,
now.
sorry.
Okay? All right. So
Professor.
related to that, how do I sign up for an evaluation of my potential injury risk given my gait and shoes using your cool lab and equipment?
Wow, that's a good question. So reach out, email bssc.uoregon.edu is our entry email to our group. If you want to have an evaluation done, we can begin the conversation with you. We don't do it for everybody because we tend to talk people out of it. Usually we say, I don't think you actually need all this testing. Here's some advice. Just do these things, and you probably can be happy without our data. But if you want to come in, we're happy to have you. So.
All right, next question. Could you talk about some of the new technology being employed by running shoe companies which has improved distant running performances so significantly in recent years?
The augmented footwear, super shoes. It's amazing. So we've been watching this, and we have friends, couple in the audience here tonight who were involved in the Breaking 2 effort from Nike, the first and the second effort. And we've worked with people from Nike over the years to help validate some of their concepts. Usually they already know the answer, and we just say, yeah, it's pretty much that answer. So it's been fun to see that development kind of evolve over the last 5 to 10 years. Initially, Nike was the first to market on this, for sure, and it was great to see the outcomes. Now all the companies have caught up, and it's gotten to the point where now the regulation bodies are saying, maybe that's cheating. Maybe there's too much technology in your shoes. So they've built standards now for how you can use them. I think there's still more to be done in that because the track spikes that have been making the news the last couple of years that have allowed world records to be broken, in addition to the athletes' amazing talent, we've studied those a little bit and worked with those companies to give feedback about how do you optimize it for how Bob strikes the ground when he runs versus how I strike the ground. Is it the same shoe for both of us, or is it a different shoe based on how I load? So I think there's going to be a lot of customization in that space. Is it cheating? Yeah, just the same as every new technology improves performance. If people don't have it, I think it's unfair. But once it's there, you got to catch up. So that's where all the companies are now.
My feet are flat, so I'm a forefront
Yeah, you shouldn't
striker.
run. You don't run.
No,
Yeah.
I shouldn't run. All right, there's just too many good questions here, but I think this is an interesting one. Could you give us, you talked about how inaccurate in some cases the wearables are. Could you give some thoughts on the commercial wearable devices, Whoop, Ring, Aura, pros and cons? Or is any of that data worthwhile for the average athlete?
Yes, it's worthwhile.
Okay, that was a quick answer.
My concern, honestly, is sometimes, as with any company, there's a bit of overselling. to say it does everything. It makes soup for you. It makes, like, it tells you too many things. But maybe 3 of those are accurate. The rest of the dozen are like speculative. I do think, though, that those companies are hiring ridiculously smart computer programmers and sensor developers who are improving that space. So they will get better at answering all those other dozen things they claim currently they can measure. But I would consult with your local physicist or engineer to say, is this possible that it's telling me this? I would treat a lot of the claims with a bit of many grains of salt.
All right, we're getting lots of questions about the soccer cleats. I'm going to sort of combine these in a way and say, what's with the companies that have taken sort of the just shrink it and pink it approach to things and haven't really focused on half the population in developing sportswear?
It's a really good question. I'm not in commercial industry space, so I can't speak for their decision making. Some of the companies we've talked to said it's not monetarily worth it to them, which to me sounds ridiculous, since again, 50% of the population in the US, the women's national team has been amazing for decades, and the men are slowly getting to a reasonable stage. I feel like it could have been an easy win to design ahead of time for this. Having said that, there are some companies finally getting into the space. There's a company called Ida Sports, it's very young, maybe 6, 7 years old, based in Australia. We don't necessarily like how their shoes look, but they're made for the female foot and designed with that in mind. We think they could improve it a lot with better engineering. Nike has dropped a few shoes in the last couple years, or last year, that are designed for a female soccer athlete. We have opinions about those too. And then I think Puma just recently has been designing soccer cleats with the female lasts instead of male lasts. Hopefully, the popularity of soccer in the US is increasing, specifically with the women's sport. And I think that if we continue to pound the drum on this, the companies will have to come along. And our goal is to train up people like Emily. She already knows what she's doing, but train her a little bit further to then go into the world and say, I have the plan. Here's how we're going to make the shoes. And that quickly all the companies like Breaking 2 will have to catch up to get caught up to where those designs are going to go. So I think it's coming.
Last question.
Yes.
Liz Budd wants to know, what's the best thing your mom ever taught you?
The best thing my mom taught me? I'll have to think about this one. Okay, this is an easy one, actually. So do unto others as you want to be done to you. This is something that kind of becomes cliche sometimes, but in my house, very much like you were taught respect because you were given respect. And same principle comes to how we treat our students. In my lab specifically, I really try to embody that it's mutual respect. Everyone is a huge fan of everyone else in the room. We call it the Mutual Admiration Society, where we all think what the other person's doing is the coolest in the world. And we respect their opinions, we respect their willingness to call us out on things. And so it makes the academic family much easier to mimic the household family. So thanks, Mom.
It's great. Well, that's it for tonight. I want to thank you all again for coming tonight, and let's thank Professor Hahn again for an inspiring lecture.
If I remember right, the students who did the demos, I think, are maybe going to stick around for a few minutes if you want to talk with them or see what the things are that they were testing. If you're okay with that, they will be here for a few minutes. So.
Sounds good. We'll see you all next year.
Thanks so much.